We don't know what happened to those Colombian families. After the stories we've heard, we don't want to risk a journey on Mexico's roads. So we cross the border back into Arizona to pick up a hire car and drive west on American highways through the arresting, rugged desert landscape. In California, we'll again get our passports out to enter Mexico once more through the official port of entry to Tijuana. The messy city of Tijuana is located on Mexico's border with the United States, and it's built across a series of deep ravines. We're on the outskirts of the city, where the hills get high. Ahead of us, maybe 20 people. Sturdy shoes, spades, picks. This is one of Mexico's many groups of people made up of families of the disappeared. And they go out together looking for the bodies of their loved ones. There's a lot of dogs. This is a hillside strewn with stuff discarded, plastic bottles, toilet rolls. There's an old anorak there, sweatshirt, tyres, of course. Eddie Carrillo, who leads this group, has got his phone out, taking pictures. Eddie tells us that over 4 years they've found around 40 or 50 bodies here. He's a neat man, his hair precisely parted, an urgency in his demeanour. Eddie's still looking for the remains of his teenage son, Eric, who disappeared 5 years ago after a night out in Tijuana. Over 100,000 Mexicans are registered as missing, victims of the drug war, impunity, and the proliferation of armed, bloody criminal groups. Now, migrants have fallen prey to the men with guns too.
Muchas veces los migrantes cruzan.
He says that often migrants attempt to cross the border here to the US without paying a coyote or guide. When they don't pay whoever has control of the area, that's when they may be detained. If the migrants won't give the phone numbers of their families to their captors for the purposes of extortion, well, the price of resistance may be death. Eddie thinks that's what happened to a group whose remains he found nearby.
Eran 5 cuerpos, 3 estaban juntos.
There were 5 bodies, he says. 3 were together and another 2 separated from the group. 1 person was tied up. 4 men and 1 woman, all shot in the head, execution style. Has that been confirmed that they were migrants?
Sí, tuve una llamada de una persona que fue identificada.
Yes, he says. He had a call from someone who told him one of those identified was his brother, who was heading to the United States.
I call them narco coyotes because they not only cross people, they also cross drugs. So it's a new type of human smuggler.
Dr. Victor Clark Alfaro lives in Tijuana and is a professor at San Diego State University in the US. I first met him back in 2008 at the start of Mexico's so-called war on drugs, an expert on the cartels and the shifting pattern of migration across the Mexico-US border.
When I began studying migration at the end of the 80s, there were 30 countries coming to Tijuana, coming to the border. Nowadays, there are
120 different nationalities.
Nationalities are coming to Tijuana. You just name it, from Burundi, from Mozambique, El Congo. It was unusual to hear Russians. Chinese are not new in Tijuana. What it is new, they are coming by hundreds.
And so these people who are human smuggling now, who are working at getting people across the border, they're different to the traditional human smugglers that there are in Tijuana that have been working here for decades, kind of family businesses.
Yes, they are very disappointed because they say, thanks to narco coyotes and drug cartels, their reputation has been terribly damaged. They don't like there are these narco coyotes who are crossing also drugs, who are recruiting migrants also to cross drugs. One of the key elements of organized crime is violence to control their own territories, violence against innocents. The violence is part of their daily activity.
And how often are you hearing stories about violence against migrants?
On a daily basis. It's part of the daily risk migrants face on their efforts to go to what used to be, because it's not anymore, the promised land.
The promised land, a stone's throw north. Tijuana is one of Mexico's most brutal cities. Murder is an everyday event. And the shelters where migrants stay before they attempt to cross the border have become vulnerable to attacks too. There have been reports of armed men opening fire on one of them, residents being extorted at another, and one refuge received threats to burn down its facilities. Instituto Madre Asunta is a refuge for migrant women and children in Tijuana. Although painted a delicate blue, this is a fortified property with high fences, gates and grills. Maricruz, a social worker here, shows us around.
Hoy en día hay 24 cámaras.
There are 24 cameras throughout the property, she tells us. Video surveillance outside too. But it wasn't always like this.
Era un albergue a puertas abiertas. Cualquier
Maricruz says the hostel used to have an open door policy. Anyone could come and have a meal. There wasn't a register or anything.
no había.
But it changed because the women began to be hunted by organised crime groups who have links to each other across Mexico. Maricruz tells us a deeply disturbing story.
La historia que les voy a contar trata de hace
15 days ago, a woman we'll call Maria arrived. Maria had been kidnapped with her cousin in southern Mexico by a gang. Both women were prostituted back and forth across the border with Guatemala for 6 months. Anyway, Maricruz says, the cousin began a relationship with one of the men who was holding the women. And because of this, she was able to help Maria escape. Furious, no doubt, the gang sent Maria a message. "We killed your cousin because you ran away." There were photos. Maria made it to Mexico City, but she was messaged again. They said they knew where she was. A friend in the US sent her the money to get a ticket to Tijuana. When she arrived, she stayed with other friends. She was distressed, injured, says Maricruz. After 2 weeks of hiding and recovering, she felt safe enough to venture outside. But the gang located her again. They sent her a horrendous message designed to terrorize her. They told her, "We know where you are, and we're going to come and get you." It was then that Maria contacted the refuge. Now she's in the US.
Quiero encontrar a una compañera que sepa soñar, que cree.
The children of residents, happy in their bright, cheerful classroom, seem oblivious to the threats against their mothers. But some of the women here, like Jessica from Honduras, have been forced to leave kids in their home countries.
mi pueblo hay mucho narcotraficante.
In my town, there's lots of drugs trafficking. Drugs, many things. All of this makes you feel bad, threatened. You feel constant fear and panic. It makes you do things that you don't want to do. My husband got involved with a married woman from a bad crowd. And when they found out about the affair, they said they were going to get revenge on me because I was his wife. So because of this, I couldn't take care of my son anymore. I left that same day. I was afraid and I just left.
And the journey north was, well, we know those stories. Jessica doesn't stop trembling, but she's recovering with the help of a psychologist, Maricruz, and the nuns who oversee the refuge. Jessica and the women we meet at the refuge have chosen not to risk an illegal crossing into the US with a people smuggler. Instead, they've registered with a free US government online app. CBP One allows migrants to schedule an appointment at one of the official American ports of entry in Mexico. Once they pass security screening, migrants may enter the US and be able to work whilst waiting for an immigration court hearing. It's one of the measures designed to dilute the power of organised crime. But one of the drawbacks of the CBP One app is the time it takes to get an appointment. And if you have no fortified secure refuge like the Instituto Madre Asunta to wait in, you may end up camping at the border like Mariposa did. So this is the rain coming down. Oh my God, cats and dogs. Mariposa shows us a video she took from inside her sodden tent. The water's ankle deep. She's from Honduras, indigenous Miskito, and lived in that flimsy structure with her 2 small kids for 3 long months.
Ya cuando llegué a frontera es donde empezó mi...
When I arrived at the border, that's when my suffering really started. I couldn't work. There was no one who could look after my children. Nobody wanted to take them because they were quite naughty. Sometimes I asked another family for a bag of rice. I felt like giving up, but I prayed night and day for my CBP-1 appointment.
Mariposa's a computer studies graduate, and in Honduras she ran a small business. But the worsening violence she endured from her partner forced her to rethink life. Mariposa left home, with a backpack, 1 child in a sling across her chest, the other on her shoulders. Her journey north wasn't too dramatic, and when she arrived close to one of the American ports of entry in Mexico, all she could see was a mass of tents.
Como había mucha gente, no estaba tan peligroso.
When there were a lot of people around, it wasn't so dangerous. But migrants started to leave, and that's when armed men appeared. They were taking people across the border to the US.
And how often did that happen, that the armed men came to that area and were crossing people?
A los 2 meses que yo estaba ahí empezó.
2 months after I arrived, this problem began. They came almost every day when it was beginning to get dark. One time, I watched when the men took some Chinese people to the American side, but none of us were allowed to leave our tents when those men were.
And if somebody came out of their tent when those men were there, what would happen?
Los golpeaban y a veces hasta le ponían el arma.
They beat them and threatened to shoot them. That's when I was most scared, when I really understood what people meant when they talked about Mexico.
Finally, Mariposa got her appointment on the CBP-1 app. She's come through her ordeal and is now living in Los Angeles with those 2 little naughty ones. She was paroled into the US on humanitarian grounds and has a year to make her asylum claim. And remember Eduardo, the Ecuadorian we met in San Luis Rio Colorado, who had endured the journey from hell across Mexico? He too was allowed into the US after attending his CBP-1 appointment. But he's still coming to terms with what's happened. When we met Eduardo in Mexico, this was the last story he told us.
Es duro y triste, ¿no? Porque cuando yo...
It's hard and it's sad because when I was living in Ecuador and I found out my friend was also being extorted and threatened like me, I said to him, let's get out of here. Go together to the United States. Let's just go. But he said no, he didn't want to leave his family. He said he'd fix it with the gang. I told him, you're not going to fix anything. Other business owners had already been killed by then. Anyway, I left Ecuador, and when I arrived in Mexico City, I got messages.
Once again, Eduardo struggles to continue.
Fueron al local. Lo mataron en el local.
The gang went to my friend's shop. They killed him there.
Entonces yo dije, pues mire, si yo me hubiera quedado.
So I said to myself, if I'd stayed in Ecuador, well, I give thanks to God. I've suffered. I've fought to get this far, but by the grace of God, I'm still alive.
That's all from Assignment. The producer was Tim Mansell, and the producer in Mexico, Ulises Escamilla. Assignment was expertly mixed by Neil Churchill, and the editor is Penny Murphy.
Linda Presley visited the US-Mexico border for a special program on the fentanyl crisis and its impact on both sides of the border.
I think that only in January we had over 200 homicides in Tijuana, and that's average. I mean, there are days where we have 17 homicides.
You can hear that by searching for The Documentary wherever you get your BBC World Service podcasts.
In 50 minutes, witness history.
Today I'm taking you back to World War II and the rape and sexual abuse of the so-called comfort women. The phrase refers to the hundreds and thousands of women and girls across Asia who were forced to become sex slaves for the Imperial Japanese forces between 1932 and 1945.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Next, on the BBC World Service, it's Outlook with me, India Ackerson. When Australian Holly Dean Johns was growing up, she watched her mother in the throes of heroin addiction. It was difficult, but it also made Holly curious.
I was keen to try it. I asked Mum many times if I could, and the answer was always no, until it wasn't, and I tried it.
First gave her some heroin, and it wasn't long before she was an addict too. By her 20s, she was also dealing, and when she moved to Thailand with her boyfriend, they made the heroin. Holly remembers her first night in a Thai prison.
I can't even describe it. Like, it was devastating. I knew right at that moment that my whole life was gone. I really believed I would be in that prison for a long, long time.
Holly's story is coming up after the latest news from the BBC World Service.
Hello, I'm Neil Nunes with the BBC News. Nearly 70 former senior U.S. military officials and diplomats have urged President Joe Biden to take stronger measures against Israel if it denies civil rights and basic necessities to Palestinians as it continues its military operation in Gaza. The open letter also asks President Biden to warn Israel of serious consequences if it expands settlement activity in the occupied West Bank. Details from Libby Capellum.
Among the signatories are a dozen former ambassadors, retired State Department intelligence and Pentagon officials, as well as Anthony Lake, the former National Security Advisor to Bill Clinton. They say there must be restrictions on U.S. assistance to Israel consistent with U.S. law. The group makes clear Israel's military action against Hamas is necessary, but that indiscriminate civilian killings of this magnitude cannot be justified. The letter also highlights that Israel's operations have been marked by repeated violations of international law.
The Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado has accused the authorities of what she called brutal oppression after two senior members of her party were arrested. She said the government's persecution of the opposition was a sign of the regime. Our America's regional editor is Leonardo Rocha.
The national coordinator and political secretary of Ms. Machado's Vente Venezuela party were arrested, accused of planning riots and attacks in an opposition-controlled state. She says the government is fabricating lies to try to win the opposition ahead of July's presidential elections. Ms. Machado herself has been barred from running for office against President Nicolás Maduro for alleged financial misconduct. She has until Monday to decide whether to continue to run, risking disqualification, or to accept that she will have to appoint a replacement.
A Russian court has ordered the detention of two employees of an LGBTQ club on suspicion of being members of what it termed an extremist organization. It's the first criminal case of its kind since Russia banned what it called the international LGBT movement. More from Warren Bull.
The Supreme Court's decision last November to ban LGBTQ activities triggered a wave of raids on gay clubs across Russia. One of those took place in March on the orders of the prosecutor in the southwestern city of Orenburg. The art director and administrator of the Pose Bar are accused of promoting non-traditional sexual relations among visitors. They face up to 10 years in prison if found guilty. Supporters of Russia's gay community say the case could set a precedent, with fears that it will lead to even greater repression nationwide.
World news from the BBC. The President of Mexico says his country will not accept the deportation of migrants from Texas, describing a law passed by the U.S. state as dehumanizing. Andrés Manuel López Obrador said the legislation recently suspended by a U.S. appeals court was against international law. It would empower Texan officials to deport people suspected of illegal crossings. The British government has suffered fresh defeats over its contentious plan to deport some asylum seekers to Rwanda. Parliament's upper chamber has voted in favor of 7 proposed changes to the bill. MPs will have to vote on it again, further delaying its passage. The legislation is intended to stop court challenges to the government's efforts to send some asylum seekers to Rwanda as a deterrent. A court in Brazil has ruled that the former international footballer Robinho must serve his prison sentence there for a rape conviction handed down to him in Italy. Robinho was sentenced to 9 years for the gang rape of an Albanian woman in a nightclub over 10 years ago. He returned to Brazil before the trial concluded. Federal authorities in the United States say 3 boys aged 11, 12, and 16 suspected of robbing a Texas bank are now in custody. Paddy Maguire has this story.
Dubbed the Little Rascals, the trio have been charged with robbery by threat, but cannot be identified as they are juveniles. The FBI had released surveillance images of the suspects following the heist at a Wells Fargo bank in North Houston on the 14th of March. One image showed all 3 wearing hoodies inside the bank's lobby. The boys allegedly passed a threatening note to a teller and then fled on foot with an undisclosed amount of cash. 2 of the boys, who didn't wear masks, were identified by their parents.
BBC World News.
Hello, I'm India Rakazan. Welcome to Outlook. Today, I'm talking to someone whose name you would be very familiar with if you were in Australia in the 2000s, because she was all over the papers. She was a heroin addict and drug trafficker, facing a severe prison sentence in Thailand. The newspapers even reporting that she could get the death penalty. And make no mistake, Holly Dean Johns was guilty. She knew exactly what she was doing. Decades on, Holly joins me online in the evening from her home in Perth, where they're in the midst of a sweltering Australian heatwave. I want to know about the person behind these crimes. Why did she take such huge risks? How did her time in prison change her? She's in her 50s now with short, fair hair. These days she works as a trade assistant in mining, and she lives with her much-loved dog, Indy. And that is a contrast to her busy life growing up.
But most of my life we lived in a suburb called Mount Lawley, which is known as prestigious suburb. I grew up a child of 5, so I've got 1 sister, 3 brothers. We always had pretty much whatever we wanted. We all went to private schools at one time or another.
During her childhood, in many ways, her family's life was a picture of privilege. They lived in a big house with a swimming pool. Her mum drove flashy cars and wore expensive clothes. And the education for Holly and her 4 siblings was paid for. But life at home was very different to the other kids at school. Holly knew the source of all the money had to be kept a secret.
When my mum and dad were together, they had a real estate business for a long time. That ended up getting closed. Then after that, my mother had 3 escort agencies, which were run from our home.
Oh, okay. Explain to me what you mean by that.
So it was, well, prostitution. She had various different women working for her, various ages, hair colour, all that type of thing. You never know what the client wants. So yeah, that was run out of our homes for many, many years.
So were they sex workers then? They went on to have sex?
It was sex, yeah.
Was that legal at the time?
No, it wasn't.
How old were you when it started?
I would have been about 11.
Yeah, okay. And what did you know? What did you understand of it at the age of 11?
Oh, everything.
Everything?
Yeah. I wasn't a typical child. I knew a lot more than I should have about everything at a very young age. To us, it was normal.
What did you think about what she was doing? How do you feel about it?
Fine. I mean, yeah. We knew all the women that worked for Mum. When people were working for Mum, they didn't just work for a couple of weeks. Like, they were working for years. And they became family, pretty much. So, yeah, it wasn't like, this person just works for Mum. It's like we were like a family.
For 11-year-old Holly, growing up among sex workers and keeping so much of her home life under wraps, the rest of the world often felt different and even unwelcoming.
nobody else ran escort agencies from their home like we did. I don't think probably a lot of people even knew what that was. Yeah, like, I didn't go out a lot as a kid. I didn't have a normal childhood, pretty much. Yeah, I didn't want to invite friends over because they might work out what was going on with the phones and the businesses. I didn't want people to know that because I knew that it wouldn't be looked on very nicely.
But did you have a nice time? Like, were you close to your brother and your sister?
We were all very close. I mean, we were typical kids. We hated each other, we loved each other, we liked to prank each other a lot. But we were always there for each other, no matter what.
Yeah, absolutely. What was your mum like? Tell me about her.
Mum was great. Mum and I were more like best friends rather than mother and daughter. Mum had a terrible childhood, so I think she wanted to give us everything that she didn't have. As a teenager, I thought it was great. You know, all my friends were like, oh, your mum's so cool. Wish that our mum was like that. And she was a cool mum. And looking back now on our life, it's not a good thing. We should have had that mother and daughter relationship and not be friends like we were. But that's how it was.
When Holly thinks back, she says that life could be fraught, but there was a certain predictability or even balance at home. Her dad was the disciplinarian, while her mum was chaotic and fun. But when she was 12, that changed.
Mum and Dad separated. She met up with a new boyfriend. When she met this guy, we all thought he was a nice guy. But with all people that have something to hide, they keep it hidden as best they can for as long as they can. So slowly this false facade of his started to crumble away and the real him shot on through.
What did you think when you first met him?
Oh, I liked him. We all did. We thought he was a nice guy. And we felt that way for a long time until the truth came out and the real him showed himself.
How did that start?
He was a heroin addict. And we'd never known any heroin addicts or been around people that were. So once all that came out, my mother then started using heroin and got addicted, as you do.
Did you notice the change in her? Did you notice the difference?
Yeah, sure.
And did you know, was it quite open that she started using heroin?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not like Holly wasn't used to seeing her mum break the law, but it was the first time that she'd seen her in the throes of addiction. At first, her mum still functioned pretty much as normal, and she had enough money to maintain her habit. But it wasn't long before heroin took over. How often would she use it?
Oh, daily. Yeah, multiple times a day.
Were you keen to try it?
Not at first, and then I was keen to try it. I asked Mum many times if I could, and the answer was always no, until it wasn't. And I tried it.
Why do you think the answer suddenly wasn't no? Why did she change her mind?
I don't know. I have no idea why she suddenly said yes.
Holly says she was 15 when she tried heroin for the first time, and it was a moment that she'll never forget.
It was night time. There was only Mum and myself at home. We were in my bedroom, and there's a thing about heroin. When people use it, it'll either make them violently ill and they'll vomit a lot, and that would be a deterrent for most people not to ever pick it up again. But for me, it was the opposite. I felt great, and I wanted to feel that all the time, so I kept using it.
Were you ever worried about using heroin? Were you ever worried about the dangers of it?
No, never. You've got to remember that when I started using heroin, it wasn't really a big deal for me, in the sense that it was readily available. I didn't have to buy it. I didn't have to break the law. It was there.
Holly told me how she used to cut her mum's heroin into portions for her, easily, secretly pocketing just a small amount for herself. But then Holly met a guy, Stephen. He was 8 years older, serious, reserved, and contemplative, a contrast to her own extroverted personality. And he was also a heroin user. So can we talk about Stephen? You met him when you were 16. Tell me about Stephen.
So I met Stephen through one of my older brothers. I knew straight away that I wanted that guy. Very first time I saw him, yeah, I just knew.
Okay, what was it?
Oh, he was good looking. He had a great body. He loved the gym. So he used to work out a lot. So yeah, he had big arms and all that type of thing. And yeah, he was a nice guy. Very easy to talk to.
What did that relationship mean to you when it started, when it got serious?
It pretty much was serious from the get-go, pretty much. I just knew, I don't know how I knew, but I just knew that we're going to be together forever. And he felt that too. I could trust him 110%. And for me, that's a huge, huge thing. Trust. It's everything. It's so important. And I had that with Stephen.
And Holly's addiction was growing. Her family started noticing her mood swings and worried that she was having a breakdown. So Holly admitted the truth. But once it was all out in the open, heroin became a fundamental part of the rhythm of her and Stephen's relationship.
Well, it was part of everyday life. When you're a heroin addict, it's a daily thing. You have to use heroin every day. And sometimes multiple times a day to not feel sick. Nobody wants to be sick. Even when I was injecting, I still went about my daily business as well. You can still function. You know, I was a drug addict and nobody knew.
As shocking as this is, it became the reality for Holly's entire family. Once heroin was established as part of life at home, all 4 of Holly's siblings also developed addictions, with what would turn out to be devastating consequences. It wasn't until she was 20 that Holly got into serious trouble for the first time. She and Stephen started buying, selling, and even making their own heroin. They had a few close shaves, but they were never caught, until Holly helped some friends doing a deal with heroin imported from Thailand. Stephen was also involved, but he was in Thailand at the time. When she realised it was all going wrong, Holly quickly got a message to him to stay put rather than come back to Australia, where he would be arrested. Holly ended up serving 5 years in Bandiab Women's Prison in Perth.
You were convicted on 3 charges, all relating to possession of and importation of heroin. Did this start to make you question your relationship with the drug and what was going on in your life?
Oh, of course. You know, that was my first time in prison and nobody wants to be in jail. Yeah, of course, you think about things like that, but for me, I didn't really want to stop. I got out and started using again.
Did you ever think about the kind of importation, selling aspects of it? Because, you know, there's you in your life and your addiction, but, you know, enabling other people's, with a life ruining and life ending, sometimes drug, is quite another thing as well, isn't it?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, of course. It is.
Did you think about that at the time?
No, not at all.
But the brutal reality of the grip and the dangers of heroin were brought home to Holly when she was 21, still serving her sentence at Bandiab Prison.
So I got called up to the office to take a phone call, which does not happen unless it's bad news. So I took the call and was told that, yeah, Mum had died. My brother went over to see her one day and we had to break down the door to get in and found Mum OD'd.
I'm really sorry.
Oh, it was devastating. Absolutely devastating. You know, this was my best friend. And Mum was the type of mother that it didn't matter what we did, she was always there for us. Like, my mother really had unconditional love for her kids. And to know that that was gone, it was devastating. We didn't have anyone like Mum.
Did she die from an overdose?
Yeah.
How did that make you feel about heroin?
Look, terrible. But again, not enough to stop me. Because you never think it'll happen to you.
When Holly was finally released from prison, her world had changed. Her mum, the centre of her family, was gone. And Stephen, the love of her life, was still in Thailand, hiding from the smuggling charges. When Holly got out, she knew what she wanted to do. As soon as she could, she went to the Thai capital, Bangkok.
I went there because Stephen was there. From the very first time I met him, I knew that this was the guy I would be with forever. So, hey, if I had to make a sacrifice to leave, home and go over there, well, that's what I did.
And you were still addicted to heroin at this point. How were you kind of managing all of that in Thailand?
So, when you're a heroin addict, at that time, Thailand was the best place in the world. It was readily available, it was great quality.
But they weren't just taking heroin. In order to afford to buy what they took, they were selling it as well. Did you worry at all? Because obviously we're breaking law every day, and whilst it's readily available, it's also can't have passed you by that Thailand comes down pretty hard on people who break the law, particularly when it comes to drugs. Did you ever worry about getting caught?
Yeah, of course. You did worry about it, especially when you were going to pick up large quantities of it from somewhere. That was always a concern. But when you're an addict, yeah, you get worried about things, but you're not worried enough that you're going to stop doing what you're doing. And I know that just seems so crazy, but